Shamangelic Healing podcast is designed as a platform to share authentic conversations about real life issues, providing you with valuable resources and tools to support you in shining your most authentic self, creating a thriving life that you absolutely love, and to support you in manifesting your soul's mission. Welcome to this episode of the Shamangelic Healing podcast. We're going to dive into all things relationships today with Mark Groves, a beautiful soul brother. He is the relationship wizard. His podcast is Create the Love, and you can find him on those socials as well, Mark Groves. And he was on the podcast, episode 17, and we explored how to avoid relationship chaos. It is the most downloaded episode so far of the Shamangelic Healing podcast. So in addition to this episode, be sure to go back and listen to that one again. Mark is just deeply authentic when it comes to all things relationship. He's honest when you need to hear the truth, compassionate when you need that as well, and also with amazing insights and perspectives about how to shift out of contraction and the contractedness in relationship and into expansion. So this is breakup, shall I wake up or shall I make up? So this is, do you stay in a relationship? Do you evolve it? Do you evolve yourself? Do you make up? And what helps you to decide whether you break up, make up, or wake up? And I love this conversation. You're going to love him too. Also, check the show notes because we have discounts on the Conscious Relationships course that I offer. We're going to give you 25% off on that and also 25% off on the Clear Boundaries course because we absolutely want you to have the tools and resources to have better relationships in your life. And also there is going to be a link to one of Mark's courses as well. So definitely check that out in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if something about this conversation today lands for you, please take a moment and share it with somebody that you think will benefit from it. And if you're enjoying the podcast, give us a rave review. It really helps the podcast reach more people. So thank you so much for tuning in. I know you're going to love Mark in this conversation. And we talk about so much and also so many tools, but also when is it okay to fart on what date? So you're going to want to know his answer to that. So let's dive in. Welcome to the Shamangelic Healing podcast. We have Mark Groves in Sedona in the house, back on the podcast. He was on episode 17, our most listened to episode. And that one was about how to avoid relationship chaos. Mark is an amazing relationship wizard. So we're here to dive into, do we break up? Do we make up? Or is this a wake-up call? And I thought nobody else would have more insight than you. And I'm so grateful to jive with you again. When we connected the first time in Canada.
Yeah, that's right.
It was just this beautiful, playful soul connection. So
agreed. Thank you for having me.
yeah, grateful for that and everything that you're doing to bring awareness to help people with more conscious relationships because we don't know what we're doing.
No,
we don't know what we're doing.
No.
So when somebody's in a relationship and it's struggling, I have a lot of clients asking they feel like it's time to break up because they're not happy or they're not seen or there's communication conflict. So how do you know whether to stay or go?
Well, it's probably one of the most common questions that I get asked, and it's very layered because first off, who am I to say you should break up, you should make up, you should always wake up? That's certainly true, and I think that's ultimately what relationship conflict invites, or even just being at a Y in the road. It invites the conversation of curiosity of what further waking up is being invited of me through these challenges. And I think one of the greatest pressures that occurs in the space when we are being invited to stay or to go is that society, one, doesn't celebrate either. You know, if you decide to stay, and let's say your partnership, so there was a betrayal, to stay after someone's cheated is shame. To leave any form of relationship is often shamed. And I think there's so much societal pressure that actually goes into making that choice or not making it, that it's hard to differentiate what is good for you and the actual partnership and your soul from what society's pressuring you to do. And I mean, there's so many layers to that.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of the reason why people stay is, what will people think? What will they say? And that fear of external judgment keeps a lot of people in relationship. Marriages, marriages especially.
Yeah, especially, you know, with children.
Yeah.
You know, and whenever I hear someone, you know, I always say, don't just stay together for the kids. Like, ultimately, every single person I've ever met whose parents stayed together for them and then broke up and told them they did that, then resents their parent. Yeah. And the parent often resents the child during that. You know, it's like, if you're going to stay together, do something about it. Don't just stay together in the same cycle. You know, when you think about what is the ideal family system for a kid, obviously two parents who are together who love each other. Two parents who are apart and love each other is actually really beautiful too. And then apart together and dislike each other, and apart and dislike each other, both can be toxic. So neither of those is better.
Right.
You know, you just end up teaching your children that it's okay to stay and not do anything, that you start to normalize chaos and conflict. And then when you're an adult and you're in chaos or conflict, you don't know to do the work. You rather just, this is normal. This is, and in some way we get sort of addicted to the chaos, and it becomes, if things are calm and relaxed, we're like, we better stir shit up.
Right.
Because
that's what we know. If
Exactly.
we're in a relationship, we're, as children, our parents were in that conflict and bickering or passive aggressive, or they triangulate the kids in the middle all the time. Oh, your dad did this, or tell your mom this, and kids get triangulated all the time. Then we get in relationship triangles. We, you know, get in the middle of things and relate. I appreciate that you're saying we normalize relationship conflict is because it's what we know. So, how do you do the wake up within a relationship that is struggling? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about a relationship that's struggling, the wake up is starting to take responsibility for what's yours within it. So, you know, so often, and we were talking about this earlier, that when we're in a relationship and we're complaining about our partner, we are often not thinking about we're part of the dance. You know, like all conflict, and that's why when we think about the same fights that we have over and over again, or what are seemingly impasses that couples get to, that as they're there, we forget that, let's call that dysfunctional or challenging dance the cha-cha. No offense if you love the cha-cha, but if that's the cha-cha and you need to learn something different, I don't know, the two-step. And the two-step is actually healthy dialogue, being able to listen, being able to sit with your own triggers, being able to be empathic and compassionate to your partner's triggers, and how we tend to pick partners who we wound them in a way that is triggering for them and they do the same for us. Not seeing that those are the exact invitations to heal those things. You know, our wounds occur in relationship, and that's where we heal them. You know, we can get our poop in a group when we're alone, but you know, then we're like, we enter dating again, and we're like, oh shit, I thought I had this figured out, and we're in the same cycles because we have to do the repairing with other. Right. You know, we can get the mindfulness and get awareness about our stuff, but it's not till you actually choose a different path, to choose to do the two-step. Well, when you do the two-step, the person's used to the cha-cha, so they're like going to try to get you to go back to what's familiar, even if it's dysfunctional. And so when I think about should you stay or should you go, or my relationship doesn't make me happy, one, it's not the job of your relationship to make you happy. And if you make your relationship the place where you seek happiness, then if your relationship ends, you'll no longer be happy. Or if your relationship has any challenges, as opposed to seeing that as a source of expansion, you see it as a thing that's taking away your well-being. Not seeing that it's an invitation to deeper levels of well-being, to deeper levels of nourishment from love. And, you know, I know in my own relational experience, it's like every time we have been invited to fracture or deepen, and sometimes you need to fracture the relationship to deepen it, that you all of a sudden just experience deeper levels of unconditional love. You experience less blame for them, and you see that you're co-creating this beautiful opportunity, which I think is important to differentiate from, when you actually ask someone like, hey, how long have you been at it, this cycle of, have you seen a therapist together? Have you done any work? And you think about how long have they been at it, and you ask them, like, I'll often ask someone, is staying or going abandoning yourself? And that offers some insight, because it requires a deep level of consideration if you're going to leave or not. I like what you said earlier, though, to be able to differentiate, like, if if no one around you had any opinions, and you could just be loved for what you choose, what would you choose? Right.
And why? I think there's also, why would you choose that? Is it coming from a place of, they don't see me, or they don't make me happy, or they keep wounding me? That all give signs to me that there's some work that needs to be done on the personal level, so that they're not blaming the relationship for their reality and for their experiences. And that doesn't mean that it may not be on its way to divergence or separation. And I like, when I'm working with clients that are dancing with this consideration, is to say, let's get into your lane and figure out, what can you do on your side of the fence? And this is the wake-up call that says, what am I doing that's contributing? If I'm not a healthy communicator, that's affecting my relationship. If I'm not being honest about needing personal time, or wanting more freedom here, or dealing with intimacy challenges and how to navigate conflict in a healthy way without wounding each other, well, then you're just going to take that baggage to the next relationship. And so I'm like, look, don't quit something until you've done your inner work. Then from that place of inner alignment, then we can see, is it aligned? Is the other person willing to do the work? Are they in? Are you doing all the work and they're doing nothing? Or are you doing nothing and you're expecting this person to just meet you, and then you're going to be meeting that in your next relationship as well? They need to complete 100%. Me, they need to validate me. And so what do you feel in that space when somebody is continuing to, what does it sound like if you're blaming your partner for everything? What does that sound like if you're not doing the inner work and you're looking at a breakup from a place of, I haven't done my work yet? What does that sound like?
It sounds like a lot of complaining about the partner. I do want to differentiate that if someone's in an abusive relationship, they'll often hear conversations about taking responsibility and do more internalizing. So if you're in any form of abuse, it's important that you leave, that you get safe.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's important, because that can feel like, oh, it's all my fault. And it just reinforces.
It just keeps bringing it, like, I need to do more, I need to. Now, if we take that on a more subtle level and we look at where regularly a partner is over-functioning and they're like booking the appointments, putting a book under their partner's pillow and be like, I don't know how that got there. We're trying to get them to do all this work, but we're not leaving space for them to show up for themselves, to show up for the relationship. And what normally happens when we're in this space of should we be together or should we not, is actually that we are in codependent relationships that are being invited to individuate. And then how do you hold together a relationship that normally your identity is lost within? How do you get your identity back? And so most of us, the relationship in and of itself is the identity. They complete me, they're my soulmate, my twin flame, not to dismiss those terms. But what can happen with those terms is they bypass the very reality that I'm not taking care of my own needs, I'm not honoring myself. As you were saying earlier, it's like the relationship doesn't make me happy. It's like, do you make you happy? I feel disconnected from my partner. Are you disconnected from yourself? And so it sounds a lot like those things. And I find that the general challenge is how do you start to individuate, find out what matters to you, what you value, and depending what gender you are and what you've been taught and socialized to make relationships mean for you, then you're also taking those stories and they have to die so the relationship can survive. Because all of us inherited codependency. I mean, the patriarchy is ultimately codependency. Women were taught to put the identity of the relationship is on it. Its success is part of their identity and community and all those things. And for men, we were taught that you needed to go and work at this job from whatever time to whatever time, and often come home as a stranger in your own house. You know, so both people lost. Men were taught not to be emotional, and the very thing their partner needs in a heteronormative, I'm speaking heteronormatively here, is, and it's true of all relationships, is their partner needs their emotionality. But the very thing they've been severed from is their emotionality. Right. So to challenge their constructs of masculinity, of what they've been taught, they actually have to abandon that to connect to their partner. So all of us are being invited to deepen through these conflicts. And, you know, I think like there's no, it occurs on so many levels through relationship. You know, we only talk about relationship because it magnifies everything you're bad at, generally. It magnifies your challenges, right? Like if you have
your blind spots,
right.
the cracks in the foundation in the classroom of relationship are going to rise to be reviewed. And whether you see that as an opportunity or as I'm just in the wrong relationship, this person triggers me, then you're going to be back in the pattern of just attracting those issues with the next relationship, different
right.
haircut, and you know, and you'll attract it in another way, and usually with a louder, painful breakup.
Amen to that.
Like so. And we've all done that where
totally.
I don't want to do the wake up part yet in seeing my part in, and for me personally, it wasn't for lots of cycles of realizing, I wonder if maybe my communication style might be creating some conflict here, because that's what I learned was relationship conflict and bullying, and that's what I brought into my marriage. Well, you know, it can't always be on his side of the fence. And I wasn't ready to look at my part until years later. I'm like, gosh, no wonder we weren't able to resolve challenges with healthy communication, and that there was either passive aggressive, emotional, or shut down or blame, or a lot of aggravated, you know, hurtful things said. And it's hard to recover from enough of those. And I think a lot of people are feeling the breakup choice just because there is a relating style that is not healthy and safe for both parties. And so after so many wounds, after a while, you're like, not only do I not trust them, because that's been eroded by how many times we've argued and hurt each other below the belt, like really hurtful things. It's hard for the relationship to recover from that. The trust is eroded so much. And if I don't know how to make amends, then the trust doesn't get built. And at some point, the breakup comes from, not only do I not trust you, I don't like you, in fact, I loathe you. Well, of course, that's going to affect the intimacy in the bedroom. If we've wounded each other so much.
Well, you don't feel safe.
Yeah, we don't feel safe, and so that's one of the things I realized, because that's one of the things that happened in my marriage, is that the communication styles and both of our immaturity and our unconsciousness, you know, on both sides,
your humanness,
for sure, our humanness, and neither of us having the tools or willingness or ability to do the wake up piece, so we chose the breakup, which was marital liberation, is what I call it. But you know, had we had the tools to disagree in a healthy way, to address challenging subject matter, with every relationship is going to have subjects that are sensitive, that are going to elicit a level of vulnerability or potentially trigger. And so what are some things that you noticed, communication styles that create conflict, and what can be in its place so that when you are disagreeing or dealing with a challenging thing, it can happen with safety?
Yeah, I think about the ultimate sort of desire to create a relationship is the container needs to be able to hold the space for two truths that are sometimes opposing. Right. And so when when the relationship has not been confronting the truth, as you were saying earlier, like when there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of stuff swept under the carpet, eventually, in the research, they say that what happens is we come to a place of really high levels of contempt. And relationships with really high levels of contempt are actually really hard to rescue. Yes.
Resentment is
right.
It's deep, and resentment is a fiery, bitter, and it's
when it's hierarchical.
Yeah,
it makes me be able to be higher than you when I resent you because I don't tell you. So I have this secret hierarchy, and then I start to have disgust. And often, so in the research, rolling of the eyes and making faces of disgust are actually the most predictive behaviors of divorce. You know, I've said that at a conference, and I remember someone being like, "Yeah, and I was like, divorced." You know? But you think about, and I joke about that, but it's really interesting how, like, everything we don't talk about, we talk about, but we do it through our unconscious behaviors, not messaging back as fast, the way we speak about our partners to other people, you know. And so when you start to bring forward truths like, hey, I feel like I miss us, or I don't feel connected to you, or your partner says something to you and you're able to receive it, your relationship is being invited to take the masks off. It's being invited to either fracture or deepen. The container, you know, like we all know that all expansion requires cracking. And so that's the invitation to the cracking is no longer will I pretend, no longer will I just just keep the peace, no longer, you know, the masks start coming off, and then what is left is just like we were talking about with the invitation of the male or the female or anything in between is to step out of the role of what you were taught to be yourself so you can be you. And you know, that fracturing is the invitation of the soul to finally express. But that's why I was saying it's
scary.
It's the relationship that's inviting it, but it's been true all along. You know, what you choose to do for a job, is that born from your soul or is that born from what you were taught? And so, you know, you think about it, if all of us if there was nothing historical operating in our relationships, then we should be able to have all conversations easily, right?
Right.
Like everything
whether it's
should
about
be
the bedroom, whether it's whatever, about
anything.
money. But what happens if from my childhood programming, having the mask on or being conflict avoidant is what kept me safe?
Yeah.
And so, you know, because a lot of times what happens is when a disagreement rises or a conflict, hey, you were looking at that, you know, insecurity rises, or you don't spend enough time with me, or whatever the story is that is coming for. Let's harmonize. Let's discuss this issue. If one of the parties is like, anytime anything uncomfortable rises, whether it's the topic that makes me uncomfortable or someone's tone, I'm feeling attacked, or I'm feeling like I'm bad or wrong, then here comes my conflict avoidance, my safety behavior of go in the cave, shut down, don't talk about it. And so how do you navigate when one person is wanting to talk about it and address it, and your partner's conflict avoidant because they have that is a safety mechanism that they've put in place from childhood.
That's their survival
strategy. And understandably so. Sometimes that's one of the things that we needed, you know, to feel safe. How does somebody move past that? And this is the wake-up stage. How does somebody move past that, and how does a partner help somebody do that?
Yes. And what a great question, because, you know, you think about how many of us are stuck in those impasses, in the same reaction response, you know, trigger reaction. And it is in that space between that we get to choose, you know, is the child still showing up or is the adult? And often we reject things like our shutting down, our criticism, our defensiveness. You know, in the research, the 4 behaviors that are most predictive of divorce, by the Gottman's research, they could listen to a couple argue for 20 hours and predict with over, I believe it's 94% accuracy if they divorce. But they could listen to just 3 minutes,
Wow.
and predict with over 80% accuracy if they divorce. So it shows you how important our words are and how important our tone is. With that all said, there needs to be compassion for where the survival strategy comes from. And what I find is that what is our survival strategy? So let's say my survival strategy was to be the peacekeeper, which most people who go into healing work, that is their survival strategy, was to help and keep things together and do all those things. And you start to see that if you actually harness it, it becomes a superpower. But if it's overexpressed, it actually becomes a space of self-abandonment.
Well, or not clear boundaries because you're getting in the middle of things
Right.
that are really, you're trying to keep the peace for somebody that they, like parents, they need to create that or not between the two of them, and a child can be in the middle of that.
Yes.
So how does, first of all, I want to know what those 4 things are, if you remember them.
I should say them.
Okay.
Criticism. So you always, you never. We don't like
kind
to
of blame,
criticism. So criticism, contempt, which is the eye rolling, the resentment, the disgust. Stonewalling.
What does that mean?
Stonewalling is shutting down, withdrawing, hanging up the phone, leaving.
Yeah.
It's generally more male as a response. And the last one is defensiveness. So defensiveness usually dances with criticism.
Sure.
And criticism and stonewalling. So we all have a certain way in which we do this dance.
We've all been
right?
trained masterfully in all of those.
Right. And so we want to know, what are the antidotes. So the antidotes to criticism are to start with I statements, statements of responsibility.
So criticism will sound more like you never, or you should, or you always. Those are more critical. Those are more outwardly pointed to them being the
They
problem.
start with a you statement.
You. And so the opposite of that is I feel, I experience, I.
Yeah, when this occurs, my experience is, I often use the term in my experience because then it verbally creates space for the other person. So I'm not claiming the couple's experience or her experience or whoever I'm in conflict with. Yeah, so in my experience, in defensiveness, I'm a recovering defender, inherited that one well. It is.
Good luck with that.
Oh, that one's actually
progress.
pretty tough because the response is actually to say, I can see some truth in what you're saying, or I can see some truth in that. And when you first say that, it's like eating your own shoe. It is.
So when you're in that place of criticism, because this is the opposite of
usually dances with criticism,
with
or
criticism.
just general feedback.
Yeah, right.
Right. Someone just gives you feedback, but the defensiveness is trying to protect self-worth.
Right. Well,
or a lack thereof.
And I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not wrong. I'm right, and I didn't. And what I'm doing is right.
Right.
And that's a defensiveness.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
And
The
it's
defensiveness.
and it blocks intimacy.
And also it blocks intimacy and also understanding of what somebody else's experience is. Not that I'm bad or I did something wrong, but back to what you said, when someone says in my experience, or what I'm experiencing in this is when I'm in that defensive place, I'm not interested or capable of compassionate listening at that point, to just understand, even if I don't agree, but just to understand where you're coming from your experience, which may include your trauma, your fears, your pain, and your triggers, which if I'm in this defensive space, I'm feeling responsible for all of that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, when the first time you say something like, I can see some truth in what you're saying, you've now built a bridge instead of a wall. You're now, I remember the first time I read the Antidote, and I was like, shit, I got to try that.
Say that. I mean, did that just hurt to get out the first time?
You know what? It was so vulnerable. I felt like I can see some truth in that, and I was like, right? But what I noticed is that I was in a conversation I'd never been in now.
It opened a doorway.
Right, and I was vulnerable and open because all of these are ways of, as you said, protecting ourselves from being hurt. So even all of our partners' responses in conflict are actually ways of protecting themselves from being hurt. And what is below every frustration is an unmet emotional need. So we usually argue about content instead of actually getting to what is below that. And when you can learn to dance in this masterfully, it doesn't mean conflict goes away.
Right.
It just means that you get to know your partner deeper, you're curious. Curiosity and humility, I think, are the two most important qualities in relationship, because it's to be able to say, like, I look at my partner and I don't date her because, for many reasons, she's lovely, but I'm with her mainly because she tells me the truth. And the truth doesn't always feel good, but the truth is expansive. And I can't see through my 9-year-old afraid to be wrong, not be enough eyes sometimes. But if I can, when she gives me feedback, which I know is always coming from a place of love, and maybe not always deliver perfectly. As she says to me sometimes, I think there's an opportunity to upgrade your communication, right?
Which is a truth, and it's an
perfect.
it's
I
an
hear it.
invitation. It's an invitation,
Yeah.
not a command or a demand.
No,
which is
it's a
different.
beautiful invitation. It's also to notice what I've just done. But what occurs is when she tells me, I know it's always making me a better human. Like it's inviting me to look a little deeper at my behaviors, my reactivity. And so when we're in reactive spaces, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, our amygdala has taken over, and our prefrontal cortex, which is the problem-solving part of our brain, is gone. It's gone. So we're in automatic wired responses.
Which is more defensive.
Very
It's
safe.
and it's like it's in survival mode. It doesn't have the physical ability to consider consequences of what I might say, how the impact it might have. It's just
it's immediate.
protect.
Yes.
And that's where I think the most lethal conflict happens in relationships, is when we're both in fight or flight, not considering the impact of, maybe I shouldn't say this. Like that's
totally.
There is it's all the words are already out, and that's where where I think it took me a long time to figure out when things start getting agitated and we're already in a downward spiral, like trigger, like unconsciousness. There's emotionality there. Things are starting to heat up, that I can step back at that moment, not hide. I don't mean retreat, but I mean step back, saying that, knowing that if I continue down this course with this person and I don't put an interrupt here, it's going to be a bloodbath.
Yes.
And so there's a willingness to take accountability that if I stepped back, it doesn't mean abandonment. It is actually a loving thing for me to say, and it took me a long time to learn this. Hey, I want to pause here because I'm witnessing that not you, I'm witnessing that I'm getting triggered, and I don't want to say or do anything that's going to cause harm to you, or me, or us.
Yeah.
So I'm going to step back, I'm going to cool off, I'm going to get in my center, I'm going to prioritize and feel what's really important here so that I can contribute to a solution to this very tender and sensitive issue, because I want the best for both of us. Like that was definitely not ever something
that was not my youthful desire.
That was not what I was modeled.
Mine was to be right.
It was to be right, and to win.
Right.
Right, to conquer and acquire. Which
is interesting, because the shift when you start to make it not about me and about we is you don't lose me, because most of us think we abandon ourselves for the connection,
which happens a lot,
a ton, and that's codependency, or we abandon the relationship out of fear as well. So we will hurt the relationship for self, or we'll hurt the self for relationship. So one is more abandoning, and the other one's self-abandoning, and the other one's connection abandoning.
Okay, I get that. I imagine people understand that abandoning self to keep the relationship. I think
it's
a lot
the main narrative of relationship.
Yeah, most people.
Anxious. The avoidant people are the other side.
So that looks like not taking self, or what do you want? Really putting the emphasis on the we, and the I disappears. The voice, the individuality,
yes.
the private
most
time.
Most people know that one.
Okay.
Especially women.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And what is this? The other one that you said.
So you sabotage the relationship to save self.
Oh,
so
okay.
there's an overt individuation. There's an overt. So we it's like that, and this is evolutionary programmed in us, which is that we have two needs: authenticity and self-expression, and belonging. And so self-expression and belonging. Sorry, we have authenticity and self-expression, and the need for belonging are the two needs. But when self-expression threatens belonging, belonging tends to win, right? So we abandon the self for belonging. Mm-hmm. But when belonging, when we've been hurt by intimacy, and most people would know this as the other side of the codependent dance, which is the person who's actually afraid of depth, who needs this space, who's afraid of closeness. So they sabotage the relationship to save self. So all of us are
But
struggling.
that's an avoidant.
Right.
If it's there's a difference between having a healthy sovereignty that I need to step
Right.
back from this relationship because it's not in alignment, or it's not serving from a conscious way, and honoring self and having that downtime.
Yes.
But what I'm hearing, there is an avoidant nature to it, that I'm avoiding the healthy aspects of that relationship
That you need.
that you need because I don't want to do the work. So that's a breakup for the
Right.
wrong reason.
So we keep hitting upper levels in our intimacy. And so what usually has happened, so the first thing is it's this balance between how do I hold on to who I am and be in love,
This is
right?
that statement. Like when I really think about how that maps into an everyday relationship, is a daily challenge within a
Oh.
relationship.
You have a dance of your dreams, your individuation, your own reality
Time,
with your
space.
partner's individuation, dreams, and reality. And then you're merging those two things, which is the hardest work. But you're merging the two things not at the loss of self. Compromise is often thought of as a self-abandonment, or selfish if you want to hold on to a dream or hold on to something. But what's really interesting is that compromise deepens intimacy. So although, let's say, for example, my partner wants to move to a certain place because they want to pursue education, and I want to go to another place because of whatever, and we say, okay, well, let's go do the education first, and then we'll go to this other thing. I don't feel like I'm losing because my partner gets to do this thing, and mine is still in the plan for the relationship. So we've now deepened intimacy. Self-abandonment, though, right away, if there's no way that I wanted to do that first, and I sold out my future dream, I will now resent the relationship,
bet.
or resent my partner. And so it actually fractures intimacy, self-abandonment. And when you think about this dance between sovereignty and connection, and we think about that person who upper limits relationship, they leave, they cheat, they lie, they break up,
Because
they
they're
run.
reaching their capacity and they're not ready to deepen.
They're reaching the edges of where intimacy has led to pain. So it doesn't have to be romantic. So both people are actually doing that always. So the person who over pursues and over chases has a survival strategy where they're afraid of space. The other person runs from closeness because their survival strategy is afraid of closeness. So these people like each other because they confirm each other's views of the world, that there's this constant space, closing, distancing, until we realize that if you stop chasing, you create space for the person who needs it to then choose their way back into it. Most relational advice is about how do I stop chasing?
Because I had that experience before where in relationship, and I feel like I'm always the one doing that. And if I go back to the original beginning of the relationship, it's like, oh yeah, I took initiative first.
Right.
And so no wonder I haven't given space for this person to come forward. And and a lot of my clients too will say, well, then they won't. And it's like, well, then that's the truth.
Right. And that's actually makes you leave your own role.
Right. And to be able to be in reality of that, of like, well, oh, I have to overcompensate, or I have to over-initiate to hold this together. Well, then I'm going to be the one in the resentful space.
You're self-abandoning to create the relationship.
Exactly.
So the relationship comes from a false self anyways.
And not being in reality about whether or not this person can actually show up.
Well, not even letting them.
Not even letting them, or giving them space. Because
Right.
if you give them space, they'll show you. If they want to come forward,
Right.
they will. And if they don't, let's see, they don't want to.
Right, and that's the fascinating thing about relational advice generally, is to the person who's over pursuing. Mm-hmm. And the other person is, when we look at relationship advice on avoidance, it's like, well, if you're avoidant, then I guess you just be alone. That's sort of how it's communicated, which is not true. You can learn, because it's the nervous system dysregulation that causes the person to over pursue, and it's also nervous system dysregulation that causes the person to leave. So we both have to learn how to regulate.
And nervous system regulation has a lot to do with our past traumas.
Right.
Of whether our trauma was I was abandoned or left, or my space was invaded and I didn't have it.
Right.
And
Controlled
that's a
parents or
trauma. That's a trauma to the nervous system if we don't feel like we have control over our bodies or our space. And so then we attract people that are more invasive. And if our trauma was more, everybody leaves me, and that kind of betrayal of abandonment, then tend to be more the chaser.
Right. That's exactly it.
Right.
And
So we're
so,
gonna the wake up invitation there is that the people that you're attracting or the experiences that you're attracting are inviting your nervous system trauma, because it will trigger your nervous system trauma. They're going to leave me, or I have to chase this to feel whole. Like that pattern is what is going to be rising for the wake up.
yeah, to step out of familiar roles.
Right.
So, you think about the reaction, and then the choice of response is where the adult starts to come in. So really, this is ultimately moving from adolescence to adulthood. That's what the fracture or deepen, that's what the breaking or stay together. It might be very well that leaving the relationship is the right answer for you. I always say to people, I don't care what you choose. I just care that you feel in truth and you feel free.
Right.
But if you don't feel free, and Harriet Lerner has this beautiful line where she says, if you don't feel free to leave a relationship, you'll often never feel free to be yourself within it.
Right.
And so our relationships, what we've inherited is the view of a relationship more as a prison rather than a choice. And I always, I remember when my partner and I were having a conflict and talking about the structure of our relationship before we broke up and then got back together, it was like, I never want our relationship to be a prison. Like, I want you to leave if you're supposed to leave. And I'll love you no matter what you choose, but I'm also not going to abandon my own story to then pursue your story or try to convince you to be here. As soon as you go into selling someone to be somewhere, it's you are leaving yourself. And I think about so often that we do this where we're the ones trying to get the relationship to work and
force.
And if you just ask someone, do you want to do the work with me, and they say yes or no, and you listen, or they say yes and they don't do anything,
and you get to meet that. There's a level of being with reality
necessary.
and not in fantasy about it. Well, I'm going to fix them, or they said they were going to be monogamous, or they said they were going to do the work with me, and now it comes time to do the work, and that's beyond their capacity. Or
where are they?
And that their words might be there, and that might be one step closer for them. And I think it's important to witness that and to be in compassion about it, is that their intention may be there, and their maturity, their ability and their courage may not. And to be in reality about that says this is their capacity.
You have to be in reality, because if you're not standing in truth, you're not standing on solid ground. That is the deepest invitation, is like, okay, perhaps you actually leaving is the space they need to realize to step out of their familiar role of underfunctioning, of not doing any work, of like, I'm going to lose this person I love who I keep saying I'm going to do something. Whenever, people often say believe actions, not words. And I'm like, no, don't. Whenever there's a disconnect between words and actions, it doesn't matter which. Just the fact that they are not aligned is the red flag. To be curious. Yeah. To be like, okay, well, something doesn't make sense. Because, often I'll hear someone be like, well, they say they don't want a relationship, but they treat me like a partner. And I'm like, that doesn't mean shit. They still told you that, but they're getting all the benefits. So you're going to try to trick them into a relationship because they didn't say it, which is manipulation.
Right. Yeah.
But we don't like that side of it, because it removes the ability to be a victim in that space.
Right. And so I think what you said about red flags, when I have clients coming in the door all the time, and they're like, oh, this is chaotic, and this relationship, the blame languaging, they're not, they're this. And I'll ask, let's go back in time to the first, when, like at the very beginning, what was your first red flag? And they're like, well, which one?
Right.
It
was a base camp at Everest.
Right. There was addiction, or there was infidelity, or there was dishonesty, right from the beginning. Yeah. And so that becomes a self-betrayal, because our intuition is telling us there's dissonance here, there's misalignment here.
Yeah.
And the self-abandonment, well, but I love them so much, I'm going to fix them, or they're going to change. And then there's this whole burden of expectations put on this person. And then this is the rescuer, routine that happens.
I was that role.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, Mark.
Is a recovery
I've never done that
group,
at all.
actually,
That's somebody else does that. I don't know
I'm the
anything
only
about
one
that.
who does it.
Right? And so, but that when we're in that place of not being honest where somebody is, and if somebody else has already moved through that, let's say it's addiction or whatever it is, and there's this fantasy of I'm going to change them or I just need to wake them up, but there's still this dissonance here.
Yes.
Then you've got a coach and a student, and that is not ever going to create a healthy dynamic.
Well, the coach is not available to intimacy.
Well, and neither does
Right.
somebody that feels like they're
broken all
they're
the time.
shamed and they didn't,
Yeah.
you didn't do this right. And like, that's very emasculating. That's not super sexy for a man or a woman to
No.
feel spoken down to, or that they're not enough, or did you do your homework, or you didn't do
Did
that
you do your
right.
homework? Yeah.
Like, it's not.
That
like,
doesn't
you said you were
stimulate
going to do that.
arousal.
No, it's not sexy. So
No.
that distortion from the very beginning is going to create dissonance in the relationship, because I don't want to be honest that I didn't do the thing, because then I'm going to get in trouble, and there's that disconnection.
Yeah, there's that hierarchy, and you think like one is being parentified and the other one's
Exactly.
being infantilized.
As soon as you get
Is
into
the
that
word?
space,
Infantilized? Yeah.
then the intimacy is not going to be really safe.
Well,
and thriving.
it's also enmeshed. It feels like parent-child, and although that might have a closeness, and it will
Right.
be a very sexy honeymoon phase.
Right. And
The
then-
should we stay together or break up is usually because there's a loss of identity of self, and you pay attention to that. I mean, and the research says that it's about 3 years, but it can happen real quick, and it
Right.
can also,
Go
because
on
it's
and
what we're
on.
taught, it's like Disney teaches us the same thing. It's 20 years down the road,
So what happens to the person that says, and I hear this all the time in my healing practice, is that I'm afraid to leave them because of what they'll do.
Because of what will happen to
Because
them.
because I've been holding it. That I hear this a lot of times, is that I'm holding it all together and I'm afraid to step back. If I break up, they're going to fall apart. They're going to go into a downward spiral. They're going to start drinking again, or they're going to backslide,
Right.
or they're just going to go into sex addiction again. And I always hear how much they're feeling responsible for their partner, their future, their choices, and their healing and their journey. It
More
was just
codependency.
incredibly codependent and enmeshment. And I also feel a deep compassion under that,
Right.
and an ego behind that.
Right. Again, yeah.
And
True.
so what do you say to somebody that is like, well, I'm afraid to break up because of what they'll do?
Well, first to acknowledge that that's a lot to hold. And I would imagine not an adult holding it. It's usually from being a kid who's
their
overfunctioned,
parents,
who made life about everybody else, holding the family together, taking care of their siblings, whatever it is. Alcoholic parent, drug addict parent, narcissistic parent. Add the recipe. And the pathology isn't necessarily important, like knowing where it comes from
Right.
isn't essential, just knowing that it exists is enough. But it's just, I remember listening to Russell Brand give a talk once, who obviously does a lot of work on addiction as a former
right.
addict. And I remember him saying, every time you save someone from the bottom, you become the bottom. And so you're actually scraping along the ground and becoming the insulation from the wake up they need.
So there's that's an enabling behavior when
Right.
you're, and this is I talk a lot about on my Clear Boundaries courses, and I know you address this topic a lot about not being in your lane, about enabling a behavior because you are in their space too much.
Right.
Not allowing them to feel the consequences of their financial decisions, their health decision, their addiction decisions, and by being that buffer, you're not allowing it to feel, and so that means the classroom needs to get louder for them to feel it, and then
Well,
I
it's
need
your
a buffer,
classroom, too.
right? To learn how to hold space over here. So what I'm hearing you saying is to share to that person to get back over here and to bring
Right.
their rescuer tendencies back over and allow this soul to go through what they need to go through.
Right, and notice how for the person who's not doing the thing, that's actually going to be incredibly hard because that's their rock bottom, is not doing it. So can I hold on to this energy? And this is true of not over pursuing, not sending that message, not running, It's can you hold on to the energy that you've not and ever held on to? And recognizing that with that is going to likely be a lot of grief, maybe anger, because that is early wounding, that you've learned how to go to other people's problems to avoid this feeling, go fix something else, or run from closeness to avoid a feeling.
Well, and that's usually because I love them, I'm rescuing. And so there's also that tendency is, how can I love them on this side of the fence? How can I love them whether they're sober or not, whether they're with me or not? How do I, so it really is inviting the like unconditional love stance over here that says my hands don't come over there in shame, push, blame, control, or try to shake up, but in this space of allowing them to be where they are and not feeling that I have to go fix it.
Well, I'm thinking like so much of this is the projection of allowing myself to be where I am, allowing myself to choose me. You know, in that constant, when will I be enough so they will change, so they'll do this, so they'll finally read the book, get sober, do whatever. It's like, when will that not matter? Matter from a compassionate perspective, but when will your worth not be tied up in this? And that is ultimately the invitation from the pain is, can you come back to you and get back in your body and become whole on your own, which you already are? And that's what boundaries do, is they preserve wholeness. They draw a line around your feelings, thoughts, behaviors. They're not just about keeping out toxicity and pain. They're actually about containing self. And so can you, as you were saying earlier, stay in your own lane? Most,
It's
that's the
challenging,
work.
especially for women that have trained to been trained and socially reinforced to be the accommodator, that are
100%.
guilted and shamed for not taking on everybody else's stuff. And so that is a very, big transition for a woman to come back into this space.
And society doesn't like it.
No,
they're shamed. Us to have to show up.
Exactly. Then we are parenting ourselves and get shamed for how selfish you are for withholding love from me, and that brings up a woman's deepest fears, like guilt.
Right.
Guilt. That's our lowest frequency that we can feel, is that guilt of not showing up, and it's learning how to show up for love for self and others.
And redefining what showing up means.
Right. So what happens when, thank you for that definement, because that was a nice piece there. What happens when we break up for the right or wrong reasons, whatever. Breakup happens, it's nasty. It's, it didn't happen gracefully, and it didn't happen, necessarily consciously, whether there's a betrayal or there was just ghosting, or whatever. What do you recommend for a healthy post-breakup support? How do you hold space for yourself when you're wounded and grieving, and all of your triggers are, your wounds are right up there, and you're alone and afraid, and like your stuff's up? How do you not just fill the void or go to sex or bring them back when you know it's not the right thing?
Yeah, that saying, to get over your ex, get under the next, is horrible advice.
Oh my gosh.
Although maybe more momentarily soothing. You end up with a shame over. That's not treatable with anything but
and then you just feel worse, and then here comes the alcohol, then the sedation, here comes the numbing.
And then the cycle continues. Having been through a pretty rocking breakup, but having done it, it was the first time I'd ever been through a breakup and not drank. I haven't drank in a couple of years. And I remember really noticing how much I was feeling, and so much of, I found this a lot to be true, that so much what we might think of as new pain is actually old pain that's being triggered by loss, by death, by fractures. And I learned that grief is so grounding, that it does actually serve an incredible purpose of making you contemplative, to make you think about and feel things. And it's so rooting that it doesn't mean that it's not going to be helpful to eat some chocolate and to watch Netflix or something that allows you to just momentarily get up to breathe, go out for walks. eat nutritious food. You know, it's interesting to me that in life's hardest transitions, usually the things we need most are actually the things we throw out the window first, you know. We need exercise, we need community, we need, you know, because so much pain can become very narcissistic. And what I mean by that is that we often believe our pain to be unique. And this is not to dismiss the uniqueness of your suffering, but it's that we then want to sever ourselves from other people because they won't know what it's like or they won't understand. And I remember listening.
It's embarrassing.
It is. There's shame, there's embarrassment, and I remember listening to this talk from Francis Weller, and he was told by one of his mentors that he needed to practice the yoga of ordinariness, that he needed to practice and recognize that he was actually ordinary. And what I thought was so beautiful about that was when you start to see that your pain is familiar, that it is actually your imperfections that make you connected and make you human, then you start to see that your suffering is actually the window to another. And so you, of course, need it's great to surround yourself with other people who are going through similar things or have been through similar things. I mean, now we have so many communities we can go on Instagram and, you know, or Facebook or whatever it is that, you know, I always offer the thought, though, be mindful that it doesn't become your identity. So it becomes,
divorces and so
right,
on.
like survivor of this, divorce this, because as soon as, make it part of your story but not part of your narrative. Right, where it actually becomes, so it's so important, and you had said this very early on, is can you take responsibility for how you contributed to your relational outcome? Because you did. Because it was a dance between two people. And so if you can hold the shame of that, because it's going to bring up shame, then now you have a window of turning the relationship into a placeholder of wisdom.
Right.
And, you know, I find so fascinating about our society is that we tend to exile people who are going through things like divorce or breakups when the very thing they need most is actually community.
Understanding.
Right, to say like imagine it, I wrote this article years ago that was called, maybe instead of shaming the divorce, we should be learning from them. And what I thought was so unique about giant breakups, it doesn't matter if you're married or not, but I think there's that extra societal pressure when there's a matrimonial connection. And I thought to myself, like, what an act of self-reclamation to go against everything you're taught and to actually step into the zone of exile, to choose self. And I thought, these are the warriors, actually. And again, I'm not, you know, there's many reasons people break up. I'm not judging any of them. All of them are invitations to embody wisdom from, and so imagine if as communities we said, teach us what happened, teach us what you learned, teach us where you took a left when you should have taken a right. I just think there's so much wisdom in our relational pain that we don't sit within ourselves. And I think it's because as a society we reject breakups and we reject relational endings because we're afraid of them ourselves. And because we're afraid of them ourselves, we can't even look within ourselves for where we might be going that way. And you know, the very conversations that will fracture a relationship, maybe end it, are actually the ones that deepen it.
Yeah, regardless of whether if it's transitioning or not.
Doesn't matter.
Just to be honest, to be understanding, to be present, to be compassionate, so that whatever transformation within the container, whether it's a liberation of the container or it's an evolution of the container or it's a recommitment,
right,
let's go deeper, whatever it is that is going to come from waking up the relationship.
Yes.
And waking up to acknowledge my part in it. And I appreciate that you said in this time after a relationship to go inward and to take that time and to look back at the relationship. What did I learn? And a lot of times in relationship, it's so common when there has been a really intense breakup to just throw out all 10 years.
Oh yeah.
And
to discard it.
To discard it. And I say, you know, when we look back, we also get to say, this is what I learned. This is what this beautiful soul showed me. This is what I got to experience. This is where I expanded. This is where memories are filling my heart. And learning from the pain points of what I would do differently, or red flags I avoided, or where I was more blaming in my communication, or whatever it is, because that allows the wake up. That's where I say this whole thing about, breakup, wake up, or make up, and that it can be sometimes that in that wake up, after the wake of a breakup, that's sometimes the deepest, profound wake up time. And we can bypass it. We can miss that opportunity by just
so much juiciness.
The pain is so deep. I'm just going to go and find the next person that's better than that last person because they were such a blank. And we miss the opportunity to wake up and learn and grow and evolve and get to know ourselves better, so that we're not abandoning that in a relationship again, and that we can learn from our mistakes and acknowledge where there might be an opportunity to grow. I might need better communication. I might need to get some core healing help. I might need to learn a different tool or learn clear boundaries because it was too enmeshed. I don't know how to say no, or I don't know how to express my needs and wants because it's uncomfortable. And I feel like that's the opportunity that so many miss in the breakup, is to learn from it so that it doesn't keep repeating again and again. Or in a breakup, it's so painful and I miss you so much, even though it's not the right relationship or we're not right for each other, just to have sex be the binder back to the relationship again. So can you talk about that, of like where, what that does when we just are using sex to hold a relationship together?
Yeah, it's one of the core parts of healing after a breakup is no contact. Is actually boundaries around communication. And I know people who have kids, that's more challenging, but you need to have boundaries around what communication looks like and what will we communicate about and what's not okay. So boundaries are really important for the healing process.
So you have to unfriend, unfollow, like you have to...
You can block, you can unfriend, you can follow. If it's safe to do so, you can express to them that you're doing those things and why, because it's for your healing.
Individuation.
You're not, right, individuation. That I'm not going to have you show up as seeing my Instagram stories or liking my pictures because I'm afraid of how you'll feel if I block you, or that I might lose the relationship. You already lost the relationship. This is why connecting, as you said earlier, connecting to the truth. What is the truth? How did the relationship go? What was it really like? Is it actually over? Like, if you don't connect to any of those things, you're not standing on solid ground. And what you were just asking about, when we then maybe have sex again or just do that periodically, hoping that perhaps they will want to get back together. Again, it's the abandonment of self. You're putting your body in an unsafe circumstance for the hope of choice, but not actually choosing yourself in doing it.
Well, and there hasn't been the work to solve the issues in the first place, and just having a sexual experience doesn't fix the communication. It doesn't address the issues that aren't working, and so then there tends to be a deeper fall, I feel like, after that.
Well, it's self-abandonment, shame, and noticing that you're willing to put your body in unsafe emotional spaces, which so many of us are conditioned to do that for so many reasons. And also recognizing that arousal in that space actually treats the feeling of abandonment and rejection. So it can become a cycle, and this actually is... Right, it becomes people's relational experience. They are dating someone, they're not feeling chosen, they have sex with them, they feel this calming, and then they're still not being chosen. So the person's maybe messaging, dating other people, lying to them, but they have sex, and so it treats it, and so it becomes, we might call it something like eroticizing your pain, that it actually becomes the treatment of the suffering is through arousal, as you said, addiction.
And that just keeps the unhealthy relationship.
You're just avoiding the pain.
It just keeps it going. And this is where we see that we broke up, we got back together, we broke up, we got back together, and it's like he's my, he or she, my arch nemesis, but they're also my greatest love. And
my twin flame, my soulmate. I'm like, get more of them.
Yeah.
Like, just redefine it so that more exist. Because your twin flame, your soulmate, as soon as you make it one person, you live in a space of scarcity.
Right.
So I challenge, because that's usually from a spiritual practice, those words are used, is to say, is there actual purpose in your life to wake you up to love what actually love is? Is it to wake you up to the healing of your suffering? Because every time even you do the makeup, sex, the thing, you're still not listening. So the deeper, you said earlier that the pain will come in a greater way.
The wake-up call will be louder and more hurtful.
It might be that you're going to have a kid now. It might be that you're going to do whatever, but you will continue to suffer till you choose to pay attention to your suffering. And then you ask, why? What are you teaching me? Why won't I pay? And maybe you learned as a kid to never to ignore pain and suffering, to exist in relationship with your family. I have so much compassion for that, but you're not a kid anymore. And so would the adult send a child into a relationship where they don't feel chosen, where they don't, right? So it's like, why would we continue to do that to ourselves? It's again, I have so much compassion for where all of it comes from, because I have to have it for myself and where it's come from for me.
It's come from the patterns that you've kept repeating over and over, that you've decided to wake up to different things. Same thing here of like, gosh, this keeps happening. I wonder if it's me.
Right.
I wonder. I
I'm
love
the common
this.
denominator
Like, get curious and get quiet and go inward and give that space. Give that space and be willing to learn and upgrade your communication styles, your personal awareness practices, and be willing to learn a lot more about your partner, not just how they can fit what you want in their life, but how you can honor that they have their own path, their own journey, their own passion, their own feelings, and how we can evolve more to hold space for our partners in these ways.
Yeah,
whether they're coming or going, whether they're in or out of our lives, or whether they're
right.
awake or asleep.
Can you love them
either
regardless?
Way. This is
but
really
that's
conscious
the work.
relationship.
Right, that's the work, because you think like it's not your partner's job to stay in a relationship with you because you'd be uncomfortable if they left. Like,
100%.
right, like why would you want that?
Right.
So then it's contrived. It's not even real anyways. Yeah. And so wouldn't you rather the space so you can then analyze why you need that? And also, when you enter a relationship again, you're not seeking for someone to heal you, then you can just be loved.
Right.
And that's such a different level. And I say that recovery group over here of that, of like, wow, when you actually finally go against and choose the thing you've been waiting for from someone else, you finally give it to you. You no longer date with this gap within you that you're trying to fill. You're full, and then you meet someone else who's full, and then your two fullnesses meet each other, and then there's space for two humans to coexist. Again, that can occur within relationship. It's not to say you need to leave to discover that, but the old relationship has to die.
And both parties need to be willing. A lot of times what I see, sometimes it's the man, a lot of times it's the woman that is growing in the relationship, and the other party is not interested at all in counseling. They're not interested in talking.
It's often the woman who's interested in, because they're trained to overfunction.
I just had a client Friday that was like where it was flipped, and it was the man saying, I'm experiencing all this personal development, and my wife, it is often flipped, but in those situations, there is a diversion point that says, is this not aligned anymore? Because in order to keep the relationship healthy and connected, is there a level of commitment to be present for the relationship so that it is evolving and growing? And if a partner is, no, I don't want counseling, no, I don't want to talk about it, why are you applying this pressure to me? Then one gets to sit with that opportunity to say, am I deserving a different level of partnership that can meet me in that willingness? It doesn't mean they're masterful or I'm masterful at it, but there is a desire to grow together. And that's where there may be that choice to diverge if there is not a yes on the other side, and there is absolutely, I don't want to grow, and this is who I am.
Which they're allowed to feel that way.
Absolutely.
I remember talking to Julie Gottman once, the famous marriage researcher, and she was talking about, they have a book called 7 Dates, and it's 8 Dates, sorry, and it's a fantastic book. It's 8 essential conversations all couples should have. And I remember it was like, what happens if, and it's all based on their research, it's great. And I remember she said, I had a question, like, what happens if a partner offers the other partner to read this book together, and the other partner says no? I'm like, that seems like a red flag. And she was like, Mark, you can't just jump right to, it's like, get curious. What are you afraid we might discover? What are you afraid of? Why don't you want to? What is another avenue you might want to go down? Because repairing this relationship is important to me, is it important to you? And, I think about being on the other side of that, like wanting to, not wanting to change, not wanting more, and I think if you're not afraid for, which doesn't dismiss the humanness of this, but if you're not afraid of the relational outcome, then you might recognize that your expectations, desires, and needs will rise. And if you're not, if losing them means you gain yourself, and you don't have to shrink to meet someone anymore, because so many people's relationships begin with the shrinking to meet.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden you're inviting them to rise and meet you, and what ultimately occurs is that your self-worth grows. And when your self-worth grows, then now you invite other people who have a similar level of self-worth.
And if it's coming from a conscious invitation rather than a tone of you're not good enough or you have to wake up with me, if there is an invitation that doesn't have strings attached, hey, do you want to explore this with me? And they can say no because they might be working on a different part of their personal development, and it's not like, oh, that's a deal breaker. But it can be like, what would be another way? Then we get to invite them to contribute to what would be another way that you would love to, that you feel to improve our communication. What would feel great for you, so that we can choose this together.
So it's a couples thing, not the
One
person who's
person
always
always.
directing.
Right.
Right. It enrolls them.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to mention this because I took your relationship course a while back, and it was like, there was like 5 different steps or something like that, and what are your yeses in a partner, and are you embodying them?
Oh yeah.
I love that.
The
It was the relationship audit. So we're going to put a link to that course, okay?
Sweet. Yeah, relationships.
That was great. And it was also knowing your deal breakers in advance, which a lot of times people put on their wish list of what is everything else going to be in my ideal relationship, but not, am I embodying those qualities? Like that was a really good, like, oh, I want someone that's
do you actually do that?
Communicative and mature and prosperous. It's like, am I those things? So that was a good reality check of that. But the other thing was identifying your deal breakers in advance, and I really appreciated that, so that your red flags are right here. You're looking at them, and you know them, so that when they show up, you're like, hey, I already wrote this letter in advance.
Yes.
Saying to myself that when there's abuse, when there's this level of addiction or whatever, or this level of narcissism or denial or whatever is your deal breaker, that there's enough self-love and self-respect to say, I will love myself enough to say this is not the direction to go for love.
Yeah, I find so many people don't want to get clear on what they want and what they don't want, because then it leaves the space for self-abandonment.
Yeah.
So it actually leaves the space for nuance, and what they'll do is they'll abandon what they say in order to experience connection. So authenticity versus belonging. Like authenticity, we will sever authenticity for belonging until we realize that belonging actually requires me to be my authentic self.
And then that level of self-worth starts to attract relationships at that vibration.
You're no longer like someone who loves themselves. Someone who is available doesn't find unavailability attractive.
Right.
It's just a no-go.
Right. You're like, okay, not available, not an option.
Boom, done. I only entertain availability because I'm available. But if I'm not available to my red flags, my deal breakers, my audit of true self, then I can't be available to intimacy either.
Right.
Because I'll be afraid of what they see.
And I love that they'll say that again. They'll be afraid.
I'll be afraid of what they see within me.
Mm-hmm. I can't be me in relationship. I have to be something else.
Yeah,
there's still this playing small,
right,
or fake. So much of us have like all of these fake masks on in relationships.
Put our best self in the first. Right. I remember Dan Savage saying we should all aspire to constantly be our best lie selves in relationships. Like the person you bring to the first dates, the first couple months, is actually the best version of you.
Yeah, so
which is really fascinating to think that eventually we're like, So don't bring your gassy self to the first
I was just going to say, that's like
that takes a little bit of
farting on a date.
Yeah, you got to wait for that one.
Yeah. How many dates do you wait for the fart, do you think?
That's a good question. Maybe it determines how deep is the love, if they can tolerate flatulence.
Right. So that depends on like the chemistry on the first date.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, that's
it's like a humanness.
3-date? Is that the 3-date?
I think it's way beyond 3 dates.
Hey, this is good advice here.
I think.
This is probably the pearl of the whole conversation. This right here, right?
This is it. It's like,
Everybody's wanting to know.
screw the conflict.
When
Can you
I
fart in front of the other
when's the
person?
fart? I love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
I really appreciate that you are an overflowing wellspring of knowledge, advice, anecdotes, humor, honesty, truth when it comes to a relationship reality. And it's hard sometimes to hear the truth, and I appreciate that you say it with a level of compassion and a level of honesty and a level of humor, so it makes it digestible to be like, oh, do I do that? So I love your Instagram. You're always putting great stuff on there, and also your YouTube channel is just packed with stuff, and I want to give the link to your course. So can you tell everybody where they can find more of Mark Groves? Yes.
So on Instagram, it's Create the Love. On YouTube, same thing. If you look up markgroves.com or createthelove.com is where all my courses are. And then I have a new app called Mind. That is MINE''D, and it is therapists, coaches, all teaching different subjects and classes, and it's free for the rest of 2020. And it is really cool. You can learn all relational things on there. There's tons of different experts.
Cool.
And you can get that at doyouminde.com.
Beautiful. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh.
Love you.
It's
I
always
love
a
your work
blast.
and
You've helped me tremendously, and looking forward to continuing the magic. So thank you everybody for tuning in. A couple gifts. We're going to make sure that you get a link to that course so that you can go and get that course, because it was just really helpful. Fantastic. So we'll give you the link to that course. Also 20% off the Clear Boundaries course, because we covered clear boundaries today, and also another course that I offer that is on conscious relationships. So more tools to really up-level your relationship and look at your part and your accountability. And so we're going to give you a discount on the Clear Boundaries and the Conscious Relationship course. Go check out podcast on the Shamangelic Healing podcast, number 17. That was How to Avoid Relationship Conflict with Mark. And then I was on your show too. I was on the Create the Love podcast, which is amazing.
That was fantastic.
Wonderful.
That episode.
Okay, well, we'll do more magic.
Yes.
And so go check out those things. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you loved this episode, if you really enjoyed this conversation, please go like the show on any of the platforms. Give us a rave review, and please share this conversation, because everybody is dealing with relationships ups and downs, and we would love to have more tools and more resources out there for healthy, conscious relationships. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark Groves.
Thank you.
Go and create the love. Thank you so much for tuning in.